This is One Sentence News, a daily podcast featuring 3 news stories with a sentence-long summary and 1 sentence of context apiece. I'm Colin Wright. This is a sponsored message. I've been using Anchor as my podcast host for a while now, and it's been a pleasure to use. Anchor offers benefits that most other hosts do not. It's free to use, but it also has a collection of tools that allow you to create a podcast completely within the Anchor website or smartphone app. They distribute your show to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other distribution channels without any additional effort on your part, and you can make money from your podcast without any minimum audience size. So you can use it as a more traditional podcast host like I do, but it's also got everything you need to start a podcast from scratch. If you're keen to give it a shot, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's Monday, November 28th, 2022. Let's talk about the news. From Reuters, clashes in Shanghai as COVID protests flare across China. Mostly peaceful protests, alongside a few that turned mildly violent, typically in response to violence from police forces, have popped up around China over the past few nights, following the re-implementation of COVID restrictions in some areas and a deadly apartment building fire. The videos of these protests have been startling for many China watchers, as these sorts of things are rare in the country, especially at this scale. Those involved are sometimes punished pretty viciously. That said, several years of draconian COVID restrictions and lockdowns, paired with that recent apartment fire tragedy, seem to have nudged people into the streets and public squares in at least a half-dozen major cities and at college campuses across the country. Most experts don't think the protesters' call for change will lead to anything significant, but it could worsen some other mostly economic issues China is facing right now in the short term. From Axios, U.S. gives Chevron go-ahead to pump oil in Venezuela again. The U.S. Treasury Department has announced that energy company Chevron will be allowed to pump oil at Venezuelan oil fields for the first time in years. This drilling license represents an easing of sanctions on the Venezuelan government at a moment in which global oil and gas prices have been rising and supplies have been increasingly constrained. So while this is probably at least partially a diplomatic carrot meant to encourage the Venezuelan Maduro government to play nice with the world, it may also represent a pressure valve that eases fuel prices and helps rewire tangled energy-related supply chains. And from Scientific American, U.S. renewable energy will surge past coal and nuclear by year's end. Despite a slowdown in solar and wind power installations across the country, renewable energy sources are expected to surpass both coal and nuclear power production in the United States by the end of 2022. That slowdown has been caused by a confluence of issues, ranging from trade disputes, primarily but not exclusively with China, to supply chain issues. But clean energy installations have progressed rapidly, nonetheless, in part because of new rules and regulations, in part because of incentives provided by the government, and in part because the writing is kind of on the wall at this point that this transition is happening. And a lot of business entities have decided it's better to make the requisite investments sooner rather than later. If you're finding some value in One Sentence News, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your podcasts and/or sharing the show with a friend. You can find out more about this show or subscribe to the email version at onesentencenews.com. And you can support this and other related projects, like the Let's Know Things and Brain Lenses podcasts at understandery.com.